because ultimately the glutes really thrive in their shortened position. And
sir, excuse me, sir.
So I've got a very needy cat.
Sir, are you alright? What's wrong?
I just want to throw something out there very quickly. I actually have a podcast with a couple of friends, and obviously it's Men's Mental Health Month at the moment, being November, and we've actually just released a very mental health focused video on the podcast YouTube channel, which is Pump Fiction, and also podcast, or the audio, on Spotify and other podcast platforms. And obviously mental health is something I've spoken about a lot on the channel, but in this podcast episode I do delve into things I haven't ever actually publicly aired online, and Mike and Chris, my two co-hosts, also speak about their mental health experiences. So if you would like to check it out, I would really appreciate it if you did so, because it can always be found linked below in the description. But we're actually cracking on with the video straight away, and this was a really interesting video that was pinged across to me a few times on the old Instagram DMs, being top 5 glute exercises for growth. A lot of the questions I actually do get often surround lower body workouts, glute growth, things along those lines. So although I have covered glute growth before in videos, I figured a lot of you may not have seen it. This would be a good opportunity to have a look at Leana's top 5 exercises for glute growth, and also give my opinion on them, as well as what I would probably favour for my top 5 exercises, or maybe some of my best exercises for glute growth. But before we do so, we're obviously going to crack on with the bits that need to be done. If at any point throughout this video you decide you like the video, or even just tolerate me, then please do consider either liking the video, and maybe even clicking the red button down below to subscribe to the channel, and maybe even the bell next to it so you get notified when I upload every week, twice a week. And if you have a question you want me to answer at the end of the next video, then please do consider drop it down below in the comment section for comment question of the week, and I shall do so. I bought these because I thought these looked really cool and pretty, and now I kind of like them, but also they're very flimsy and not as cool as I thought they were going to be. So we're going to crack on with the video, and we're going to discuss the bits and bobs that need to be discussed. And obviously we're going to skip the intro and the warm-up stuff. We're going to really isolate this to the 5 glute exercises that Leana recommends.
All right, now getting into the first exercise, we have a barbell hip thrust. If you do not have access to a barbell, you can also use a dumbbell. Make sure you have a bench parallel to the barbell.
I would say my top one would also align with this, is I would say a hip thrust variation or glute bridge variation is definitely top tier for me, because ultimately the glutes really thrive in their shortened position. And
sir, excuse me, sir.
So I've got a very needy cat.
Sir, are you alright? What's wrong?
The cat is feeling exceptionally needy and distracting today. The thing is, like I said, the glutes really thrive in their shortened position. Things like the glute bridge, the hip thrust, etc., where the majority of tension is at the peak contraction, are very much shortened position dominant movements. So doing things like this are a big yes. And typically I would favour this as arguably my top glute movement. The thing she stated there is obviously you can do them with a barbell or a dumbbell. Personally, I don't necessarily align with that. I think realistically, if you look at your ability to load the weight with a dumbbell versus a barbell, you're obviously going to lift a lot more with the barbell. Therefore, because the movement itself hasn't actually changed by implementing a dumbbell, you're actually just greatly reducing how much load you're using, and therefore potentially reducing the effectiveness of the movement. So I would say like fair substitutes for this would be obviously a barbell version, a Smith machine version, or maybe a plate-loaded version if you have the right hip thrust machine. Any 3 of those are going to be a good time. The big thing a lot of people struggle with is that shin angle. So what we really want to try and do is maintain vertical shins here. As soon as your kind of shins start angling either side, you're then looking at bringing in other muscles and maybe reducing how much emphasis is being placed on the target muscles, being the glutes. So keep that in mind, vertical shins are key. And also you don't have to worry about going the whole way down. Like I said, they're shortened position and dominant movements, therefore things like the glute bridge, so off the floor instead of a bench, are going to be fantastic. The CAS glute bridge I think is also good, although personally I probably would favour a glute bridge from the floor. But again, they're all good variations and alternatives. The thing with these is you can go really heavy on these movements, so don't be scared to pile on some weight. Obviously I understand it can be a bit uncomfortable on the pelvis and the hips, but that's why this pad is in there as well. You can always add additional padding if you want to, but again, don't be afraid to push the weight and also push the reps. Anywhere from 5 to 30 reps. Arguably, I'd probably favour lower rep ranges, so let's say 5 to 9 perhaps, but it's really up to you. The next one we've also got is a Romanian deadlift. Again, this would actually be my number 2 as well. So when you're looking at like hip hinge variations that target like the hamstrings and the glutes, you typically consider either the RDL being the Romanian deadlift or the SLDL being the stiff leg deadlift. So the stiff leg deadlift is typically when your legs are obviously straighter and stiffer, and oftentimes people typically go to the floor or place or something like that, but you don't necessarily have to. The key focus there is obviously just keeping legs a lot straighter, therefore placing more emphasis on the hamstrings. To then shift a bit more emphasis onto the glutes, you would then look at like an RDL with more of a knee bend, although obviously this is very good for the hamstrings as well with slightly straighter legs. Additional knee bend means you can push your hips further back and therefore place more emphasis on the glutes, therefore targeting the glutes in their lengthened position. So the RDL is also a fantastic glute movement. And when I say lengthened position, I mean the majority of tension, or the hardest part of the movement, is going to be when you're at the bottom. So if it's a shortened position dominant movement, I would probably hold a pause at the peak contraction. If it's a lengthened position dominant movement, like the RDL perhaps, I would probably hold a pause at that lengthened position being the bottom, just as Leana is doing here. I think she's bloody nailing technique. The big thing is the hips. Push those hips back as hard as you can. Once the hips can no longer go back, you've found your range of motion. If you try and go any lower, you're really going to be incorporating more of the lower back, like the erector muscles, and less of the glutes, which is kind of defeating the purpose of the movement. And that range of motion could be above the knee for some people, below the knee for some people, all the way down to the bottom of the shin for some people. It really does depend on the person. So now we're looking at another movement being the reverse lunge, her number 3. Personally, I probably wouldn't favour the reverse lunge myself. It's a good movement, don't get me wrong, but is it one of my favourites? Probably not. My preference here would be a split squat for no other reason than just preference. I think personally it's a movement I would prefer for glute development, and a movement I personally find more stable, therefore it has less limiting factors, therefore it's something I would personally favour. But if you find the reverse lunge more stable, they are very similar movements and go through very similar ranges of motion, so you can certainly do that instead. Again, either or, it's completely up to you.
And I'm gonna be using a lower platform. This is 12 inches. So I'm gonna take my back leg, place it onto the box. I'm going to put all my weight on my left leg, and I'm going to keep my knee in line with my foot whenever I'm coming up and down. And I'm also having a slight lean, which is also gonna just put more tension onto the glute.
Yeah, some really good tips there to be honest. And like I said, obviously split squat is one of my preferred movements and something I would put as number 3, but she's obviously chosen number 4, which is fine. That slight lean forward to put a bit more emphasis on the glutes. Majority of tension going through the front leg. The way I kind of split it is obviously roughly 95% of the tension through the front leg, no more than 5% on the back leg for the stability. Regarding which hand you hold the dumbbell in, I personally like to hold a dumbbell in both hands, but again, it really does depend on you. If I had to choose between working side or resting side, I would probably personally hold the dumbbell in the working side, because it makes sense to then hold the weight on the side in which you are looking to work. But again, that's just my preference. The movement itself is fantastic, and I think she made a really good point earlier on about choosing a lower box and like a lower ledge. So a lot of people go off like quite a high box, which I think is unnecessary, puts you in a bit of an unfavorable position. She's doing a lower one of about 12 inches, which is absolutely fine. I would usually favor about 6 to 12, depending on your mobility and also what you have access to. When it comes to my number 4, I'm really stuck. I know what my number 5 is, but I'm not sure about number 4. I think number 4 I would either be torn between like a lunge variation, let's say a walking lunge perhaps, or a unilateral leg press variation, but with a mid to high foot positioning on the leg press. Again, it could be either or, it really does depend, and I couldn't choose between the two because it very much does come down to preference. I think they're both fantastic movements. So it's really up to you. Well, what would you choose? The next movement, being her number 5 movement, is a step up. Again, I do think the step up is a good movement. I think what she's doing there is pretty solid, where she's obviously telling you not to bounce off the back foot, which is fantastic, because again, that then takes emphasis away from the target musculature, being the glutes. And you also got to look at the right step up height. A step in which your working leg is at about 90 degrees. You don't want to go any deeper than that, because that shifts a bit of emphasis away from the glutes and onto the quads. But if you're really looking at like really targeting the glutes here, you think about your leg being at 90 degrees, kind of where hers is now. I think she's bloody nailed that. The step up, although probably isn't my number 5 to be honest, I think because of a few factors, one of them being stability and balance, as that can throw a lot of people off, it's not something I would choose as one of my preferred movements. Although I think it's a good movement, and certainly a movement that you can definitely incorporate, I would probably actually lean to something else. So the glute med is actually a muscle of the glutes that I believe a lot of people unknowingly sometimes neglect. So for my number 5 movement is a movement I've mentioned many times before, and a movement, again, one of the movements I never thought I'd actually align with, is a glute med kickback. So it's essentially a cable kickback in which you're kind of kicking out behind you about 45 degrees or so. Do you have to do it? Absolutely not. You don't have to do anything. That's why I've kind of labelled it as number 5, because although it's a very good movement, I think like the glute bridge or hip thrust and like the RDL, things like that, are probably slightly more important when considering how effective they are, how well they target the glutes. Her top 5 glute exercises I think were actually really good. I'm pleasantly surprised by this, because from what I've seen of her, she trains well, she trains hard, she does seem to know what she's talking about in a lot of cases. And again, when it comes to top 5 movements, it's merely preference. We aligned very much earlier on in the workout, which is is when arguably you say it's most important because they're number 1 and 2. But as the workout went along, we kind of started shifting slightly. Her preference may be different to my preference. Neither is right or wrong, it's just simply what we prefer. Early predictions, I think she could be one to watch, and she's somebody I feel like I would probably invest some time into watching myself. I think she's doing well. This comment question of the week is an interesting one because I kind of asked for it myself. And a few people have actually said, Harry, what are your thoughts on German volume training? Or Harry, please talk about German volume training. Because to be honest, I asked you to ask me. If you insist, I will answer the question that clearly you want to know, and I didn't obviously prompt by any means whatsoever. So German volume training is a training methodology that essentially refers to doing 10 sets of 10 reps, so 10 by 10. And the reason why I don't deem it to be particularly effective when considering like the realm of hypertrophy especially is for a few reasons. Excessive single exercise focus. Let's say you look at a quad dominant leg day and you just do 10 by 10 squats. Realistically, after 10 sets of squats, you're probably pretty spent. Therefore, you're probably not going to invest a lot of time into other movements after that. But then we know that the squats, although are fantastic for the quads, they really neglect working the rec fem sufficiently, which is a muscle of the quads. Therefore, although you may get good work through other muscles of the quads, because you are only doing that one movement, you are therefore neglecting the rec fem itself and therefore neglecting to target or train the quads effectively. Therefore, you would want to include another movement, let's say like a leg extension that trains the rec fem in a shortened position, but after doing your 10 by 10 squats, you probably don't want to because you're going to be shattered and contemplating life. Another one is insufficient effective reps. In the realm of hypertrophy, you only really have a potential maximum of 5 effective reps per set, which is basically anywhere from 0 to 4 reps in reserve. So 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Anything beyond that isn't what we deem to be an effective rep because it doesn't promote enough of a stimulus to then yield a sufficient hypertrophy response. And let's say we lose 1 rep in reserve every set of squats we do, and we want to reach 0 reps in reserve on the last set. So if we lose 1 rep in reserve every set, we only actually have 5 sets with effective reps by going 0 reps in reserve, 1, 2, 3, and 4, which then ultimately means the first 5 sets of squats that we performed don't contain any effective reps and are therefore essentially a waste of energy. So you could arguably achieve the same results through achieving the same number of effective reps by doing 5 sets of squats instead of 10 sets of squats. All you're doing for the 10 sets of squats is accumulating a mass amount of fatigue. Then you've also got to think about workout length. If you're resting for like 3 to 5 minutes per set and you're doing 10 sets of a movement, realistically just for squats alone you're going to be resting for a long time. Then including the working set time as well and all that kind of stuff, that whole movement is going to take you a long time. And you probably don't want to be in the gym for 45 minutes or so just squatting. You probably want to do other things and get arguably a more effective workout with a bit of variety and variation. But then let's say you're only doing 1 leg day a week and you choose squats as your 10 by 10. You're now then really neglecting the hamstrings, for example, and other leg muscles that aren't going to be worked adequately or arguably at all throughout the squat movement pattern. Therefore, it's not going to be a particularly effective leg day. Those are just my thoughts and opinion. You don't have to align with everything I'm saying. I'm merely presenting an opinion which could hopefully contribute to you forming your own opinion, which is something I would always recommend and suggest. That is it. That is the video. Like I said at the start of the video, if you like the video, then please let me know you like the video by liking the video. If you haven't already, please do consider clicking the red button down below to subscribe to the channel, and maybe even the bell next to it so you get notified when I upload every week, twice a week. And if you too have a question you want me to answer at the end of the next video, then please do consider drop it down below in the comment section for comment question of the week, and I shall do so. Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my very needy cat, and thank you for tolerating the video.